Alyssa Branch is an associate professor of acting in the Helmerich School of Drama at the University of Oklahoma, where she created an advanced Shakespeare performance curriculum. She is also an award-winning actor and director whose directorial credits include Shakespeare's Julius Caesar and Twelfth Night, among other plays.
Unlike a novel, a play is unfinished on the page. It's a template for action, meant to be brought to life by actors' bodies, voices, and imaginations, and meant to be experienced by audiences in community with others. Plays aren't designed to be read silently or by yourself. It's no accident that the word play is both a noun and a verb. The word play implies an action, and experiencing a play is meant to be an active, playful experience, not a passive one, for both the performers and the audience. Plays by William Shakespeare are no exception. In fact, Shakespeare plays invite and require both actors and audience to play. In this course, we'll explore why, of all the playwrights in the Western theatrical canon, the plays of William Shakespeare are still among the most staged, and therefore the most played by actors, more than 400 years after his death. We'll examine how theatrical artists go about exploring, rehearsing, and performing Shakespeare's plays today. And we'll accomplish this by taking you backstage, behind the scenes with us, into the actor's process, to illuminate and demystify the way artists bring Shakespeare's text to life for a modern audience. The course will culminate in actor performances of fully staged and rehearsed scenes from some of Shakespeare's most beloved plays. Experiencing a play and performance involves a willing suspension of disbelief. When you go to the theater as an audience member, you make an unspoken pact with the actors telling the story. You agree to suspend your disbelief for a couple of hours, to embrace the story they tell you, and to involve yourself in the imaginary circumstances of the play. Likewise, the actors agree to do their best to present the story in a way that makes it feel spontaneous and exciting, as though the story were unfolding for the very first time, right in front of the audience, at every single performance. Let's dive right in and listen to a piece of Shakespearean text, the chorus prologue speech in Shakespeare's Henry V, which actually addresses how a play works. To help us with this mission, I'm happy to introduce my friends and former students Brooke and Cam, both professional actors with experience performing Shakespeare, and two of my favorite actors to work with. They will be my companions in the studio throughout the course, and they're here to help demonstrate the concepts we discuss. The play begins with Brooke, voicing the chorus, approaching the audience and speaking directly to them.
Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention. A kingdom for a stage, princes to act and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry like himself assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. But pardon, and gentles all, the flat, unraised spirits that have dared on this unworthy scaffold to bring forth so great an object. Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Or may we cram within this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt? Oh, pardon, since a crooked figure may attest in little place a million, and let us, ciphers to this great accompt, on your imaginary forces work. Suppose within the girdle of these walls are now confined two mighty monarchies, whose high, upreared, and abutting fronts the perilous, narrow ocean parts asunder. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts. Into 1,000 parts divide one man, and make imaginary puissance. Think, when we talk of horses, that you see them, printing their proud hooves in the receiving earth. For 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings, carry them here and there, jumping o'er times, turning the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass. For the which supply, admit me, chorus to this history, who prologue like your humble patience pray, gently to hear, kindly to judge our play.
Thanks, Brooke. What jumped out at you as you listened? The prologue starts by acknowledging that the audience has come to hear a play, and that we don't really have armies to put on stage, or a real prince to play Harry. The unworthy scaffold mentioned is the stage, and the wooden O is the Elizabethan playhouse. The prologue wonders if the unworthy cockpit of the theater can hold all the wondrous figures mentioned in the play, and asks the audience to do some of the work in summoning them. So to put it in our own words a bit, and let the actors, ciphers to this great accompt, on the audience's imaginary forces work. Imagine within the girdle of these walls are now confined two mighty monarchies, whose high, upreared, and abutting fronts the perilous narrow ocean parts asunder. Piece out our imperfections, or the performer's shortcomings, with your thoughts. Into 1,000 parts divide one man. We hear Shakespeare saying that for live theater to work, the audience must commit to participating, to imagining the many extra people and places that cannot be shown on stage. In this way, he acknowledges that live theatrical performance is a collaboration, not only between the many kinds of theatrical artists involved in putting on the play, but also with the audience who comes to hear it. The actor speaking the prologue also asks the audience to hear their play gently and to judge it kindly. In this way, the actor establishes a friendly relationship with the audience from the beginning of the play, and also tells them how they should behave. It's important to mention that even for those of us who perform Shakespeare regularly, it sometimes takes a minute for our ears to tune to Shakespeare's use of language when we hear it aloud. So if you listened to Brooke reading that speech and found that it took your ear a minute to adjust to the way the language sounds and the way the sentences are structured, that's completely normal. As you continue to watch and listen to this course, you will very likely find that it will get easier and easier for you to understand the text when you hear it. And it's our responsibility here in the studio to make clear decisions about the way we approach and present the text in order to help you with that. You might notice that I've been talking a lot about an audience hearing a play rather than seeing it. That's partly because private journals written by audience members during Shakespeare's lifetime describe it that way. They say they are going to hear a play, while modern audiences tend to say they are going to see a play or a movie or watch a TV show. The word audience has its root in the word audio, and this reference to the audience's ears is informative in a variety of ways. In Elizabethan theaters, there was a back wall to the stage, but not much scenery was built or changed from scene to scene or performance to performance. The audience was expected to imagine what they could not see by listening to the words that describe the action. This means that acting Shakespeare requires the actor to paint the scenery with their words, to use their vocal and physical instruments to express the whole play and create the whole onstage world for the audience. Fortunately, Shakespeare gives the actors many clues about how to do that. We'll be exploring those clues in this series of lessons and demonstrations. Before we begin this process, however, we should take a moment to discuss the playwright himself. Who was William Shakespeare? What was his life like? And how did he come to write the 37 plays, plus a few depending which scholars you ask, that we generally attribute to him? Well, if you're a Shakespeare enthusiast, you might already know that there's been some argument about this. This is often referred to as the Shakespeare authorship question. This refers to the argument made by some 19th and 20th century scholars that the author known as William Shakespeare, from the small town of Stratford-upon-Avon, was just a front for some other author who, for their own reasons of royal rank or possibly even gender, did not want their identity to be publicly known. These scholars argued that it was unlikely or impossible for a boy from relatively ordinary circumstances in rural England to write plays with such soaring language, deep understanding of characters ranging from kings and queens to servants, and searing insight into the human condition. They further argued that William Shakespeare from Stratford-upon-Avon did not have the aristocratic upbringing or familiarity with the royal court they believed necessary to write such grand plays. Although the idea of a ghostwriter is intriguing, and everybody loves a good mystery, most scholars and performing artists today have dismissed this idea as a fringe theory, and a classist one at that. Artists throughout history have proven that greatness can arise from any kind of beginning or life experience. So for our purposes, when we speak of William Shakespeare, we are talking about the playwright from Stratford-upon-Avon, who lived from April of 1564 to April of 1616. Because he lived more than 400 years ago, there aren't many remaining records of his life. However, here are some basic facts. We know that William Shakespeare grew up the son of a successful glove maker, which means that he almost certainly attended the town's grammar school. He then married, had 3 children, and eventually left his family in Stratford while he moved to London as a young man, at least part-time, to participate in the theater. He worked as an actor, a successful playwright, and eventually a partner in a popular acting company. He appears to have retired to Stratford and seems to have died there at the age of 52. Knowing that Shakespeare attended English grammar school is useful because we know these schools prized classical literature and history, taught pupils Greek and Latin, and required a lot of oral recitation of knowledge from every student. It seems clear then that Shakespeare actually did receive a rigorous education by any modern standard, and could have learned the skills necessary to become a playwright, and an actor for that matter. Because we don't know much more specific information about his life, Shakespeare's written words are our ultimate guide to performing his plays. They are all we know for certain about his intentions, and they are our primary tool for the creation of a visceral experience of his stories on stage. Cam, now let's explore the prologue to Romeo and Juliet, which also deals directly with the audience's expectations for a play and performance. Just like Henry V, Romeo and Juliet begins with an actor coming on stage and talking directly to the audience.
2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parent strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end not could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage. The which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend.
Thanks, Cam. What do you notice about this prologue that might be similar or different than the prologue of Henry V? Both plays' prologues acknowledge outright that the audience has come to the theater to see a play, a fictional recreation of a story. And it's worth noting that the actor's acknowledgement of the audience is a device Shakespeare uses brilliantly and often. The Romeo and Juliet prologue is similar to the Henry V prologue in that it also apologizes for what it cannot accomplish. It asks the audience to listen with patient ears, to hear all that was missed in the prologue. But that strikes me as sort of humorous, given the great amount of information we're given. Here's what we learn. The play is about 2 households, both alike in dignity, meaning they are of similar social status. These 2 families have an ancient grudge they've been fighting for years. The play is set in Verona, Italy. The kids from these families fall in love and eventually kill themselves because they cannot be together, which causes so much shock and grief that the families finally decide to make peace. Isn't it amazing that Shakespeare managed to transmit that much information in 14 lines of verse? He told us all of that in 140 syllables of language. So we can hear that the language is incredibly dense, just completely packed with information. No syllable in a verse line is wasted. We'll talk more about this in Lesson 3, when we dig deeper into the structure of blank verse, the verse form used by Shakespeare. Now let's compare and contrast the two prologues a little bit more. In the Henry V prologue, the actor speaking the lines, and therefore the playwright, is concerned primarily with whether or not the production can do justice to the size of the story, the battlefields, the legions of soldiers, and the royal personalities depicted. The prologue apologizes for the lack of spectacle and asks the audience to fill things in, using their imagination. In the Romeo and Juliet prologue, the actor also asks the audience for something, to be patient, if you with patient ears attend. But in addition, the actor is also tasked with outlining the whole plot of the play. So when exploring Romeo and Juliet for performance purposes, the actors must ask, why does Shakespeare choose to do that? Why give away the whole plot in the first 2 minutes of the performance? Obviously, we can't know for sure, since the playwright isn't available to tell us, and no interviews or notes have survived since its death. So we have to make an educated guess about what Shakespeare intended, and then figure out how to use the prologue effectively for our particular production of the play. We have to ask ourselves what we want the audience to get from the speech. For one thing, the plot of Romeo and Juliet is not new. It's borrowed from older sources. The story of star-crossed lovers who aren't supposed to be together predates Shakespeare. So the action of the play wouldn't be a mystery to Elizabethan audiences. Maybe Shakespeare is asking the audience to pay attention to how it's told, rather than what will happen. Okay, now that we have a clearer understanding of how the prologue functions, let's try the Romeo and Juliet prologue in a slightly different way. Cam. This time, imagine you're a character who's realized you only have 1 minute to tell us all of this information because you don't want the play to start late. Or maybe you've noticed that members of the Montague and Capulet families have started sparring on the stage, and you have to tell us quickly before they get in a real fight.
Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parent strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which, but their children's end not could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage. The which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend.
Great. Thanks, Cam. That felt different, didn't it? What we just did in that exercise was to apply a clear intention to the piece. We gave Cam a specific reason to have to say it out loud. And this made it sound more urgent, more engaging, more suspenseful, and set the tone for what would undoubtedly be an energetic, dramatic night at the theater. So it's not enough for the actor to simply understand the logic of the thoughts and say the lines. They have to know why they're saying them. Usually with the help of a director, actors have to decide this about every single line they speak on stage. And they need to base their decisions on their understanding of the playwright's original intention. The process of deciding the character's intention and then practicing how to accomplish that intention is what a lot of the rehearsal process is about. And when performing Shakespeare today, actors have the added challenge of making sure that the old-fashioned language is decipherable to the audience. You might notice that our American actors, Brooke and Cam, have not been using a British dialect when they speak their Shakespearean lines. Although the words were written for English speakers who would have sounded different than Brooke and Cam do, the tradition for professional actors is to have them speak with their own regional dialects, unless the character is specifically from a place outside the norm of the play. So American actors speak with an American dialect. Though if Brooke was playing Princess Catherine of France in Henry V, for example, she might speak with a French accent just to make clear that her character is from somewhere else, somewhere outside the world of the play, and therefore doesn't speak in the same way as the other characters in the play. This tradition of having actors speak with their own dialects most of the time is partly because that's what sounds most natural for them, but also because English in Shakespeare's London actually sounded different than it does today. And just as American dialects have evolved over time, so have British ones. In fact, linguists believe that a British dialect in 1600 sounded more like an American Appalachian dialect does today. And dialects in England vary a lot, just as they do in America, depending what part of the country you're in. So we tend to use intentional dialect in Shakespeare sparingly, as an acknowledgement that actors from any geography can use his words effectively. In Lesson 2, you'll learn a bit more about the history of Shakespeare in performance to give you some useful perspective about the work we'll be doing in the rest of the course. And in Lesson 3, we'll start to dig more deeply into the many techniques modern actors use to perform Shakespeare clearly and effectively. But before we wrap things up here, I want to acknowledge that because Shakespeare performance has been happening for more than 400 years, there's a lot of information that we just can't know for sure. We can't know exactly what performance techniques looked or sounded like in Elizabethan times, and we can't know exactly what Shakespeare's intentions were when he wrote the plays. So we, the artists working with his text today, must also be detectives, mining the scripts for meaning and figuring out how to present them in a way that speaks to modern artists and audiences. We acknowledge the performance traditions that came before us, but must also make the work our own, alive and urgent to each of us in each performance. For these reasons, there's no one way to approach Shakespeare. My methodologies as an actor and director are drawn from my own training and my more than 25 years of teaching, rehearsal, and performance experience. And my work is especially indebted to and reflective of my training with Royal Shakespeare Company actress Jane Lapater, whose voice will open each lesson of the course.
I think you have to love Shakespeare, and I know you do, and you know I do, and I see that as a gift that was given me. It's not something I worked at, and if you'd said to my 14-year-old self, you're going to end up loving Shakespeare, I would have laughed you out of the room and said, don't be silly, that's not my thing at all. I didn't know what my thing was, but I was hooked when the school decided that they would do Romeo and Juliet. So I auditioned and got the role of Juliet. And the line that hooked me forever is the orchard walls are high and hard to climb. And I thought, why do people say Shakespeare's difficult? Well, of course, I was to find out later that there are lots of lines which aren't as easy as those one syllable and descriptive. And then I won the English Literature Prize at school. It's the only time I've ever been praised at school or won an award at school. And they said, what would you like? And I said, can I have the complete works of Shakespeare? And I got it downstairs with my Northgate Grammar School for Girls, Ipswich, Suffolk, engraved on. It's all falling apart and it's covered in stick-it notes of bits I've used in teaching. It's been a leitmotif of joy, the gift that doesn't stop giving. Thou know'st the mask of night is on my face, else would a maiden blush bepaint my cheek for that which thou hast heard me speak tonight. Fain would I dwell on form, fain deny what I have spoke, but farewell compliment. Dost thou love me? I know thou wilt say aye, and I will take thy word, yet if thou swearst thou mayst prove false. At lovers' perjuries, they say, Jove laughs. O gentle Romeo, if thou dost love, pronounce it faithfully. Or if thou think'st I am too quickly won, I'll frown and be perverse and say thee nay, so thou wilt woo.
Her generosity with me when I was a young actor trying to find my voice changed the path of my career and artistry. And Jane was taught by, among others, the great John Barton, who was one of the founding members of the Royal Shakespeare Company. His teachings were famously transformative for actors of Shakespeare and still inform every Shakespeare actor I know today. So as actors, Brooke, Cam, and I are all part of a lineage, a living history of Shakespeare performance passed down through generations of actors around the world. William Shakespeare is the most written about playwright in the world, and there have been many books written about how to act Shakespeare. But most of the real work of actor training happens live, in a rehearsal studio such as this one, as actors speak the words aloud to each other and are heard by the audience, bringing the text alive in that moment. In the rest of this course, we're very excited to let you behind the scenes as we take Shakespeare's words from the page and transform them on the stage.